The attack came without warning. Red lights flashed throughout the Crimson Talon as enemy ships appeared on the sensors. The bridge erupted in controlled chaos as crew members rushed to battle stations. "Report!" Queen Zarethel commanded as she strode onto the bridge. "Scarith battle fleet, my queen," Commander Vex replied. 12 ships, including 2 heavy cruisers. They have us surrounded. The queen's golden eyes narrowed. The Scarith were old enemies of the Valith Empire. They were a warrior race that prided themselves on their cruelty and their advanced weapons. If they had found her ship in this remote system, it was no accident. How did they know we were here? She asked. "Unknown, my queen. But they are demanding our surrender. They want the ship and—" He paused, looking uncomfortable. "And what? And they want Korath." "They have been hunting for a star dragon for decades. They plan to use it as a weapon against us." Queen Zarethel felt cold fury rise in her chest. The thought of her enemies capturing Korath filled her with rage, but she also felt something else, something new. She felt protective of the dragon, not just as a symbol of power, but as a living being that deserved better. "Open fire," she ordered. The battle began with a thunderous exchange of energy. Weapons. The Crimson Talon's shields flared as enemy fire struck them. The ship shuddered under the impact, and sparks flew from damaged control panels. "Shields down to 60%, an officer reported. "Return fire with all weapons," the Queen commanded. The Valith ship fought back with everything it had, but the enemy had superior numbers. For every shot the Crimson Talon landed, 3 came back in return. The Queen watched grimly as her ship took damage. "My queen," Commander Vex said urgently, "our main weapons are failing. We cannot win this battle with conventional tactics." At that moment, Jake Morrison appeared on the bridge under guard. Commander Vex had brought him at the Queen's earlier request to serve as an advisor. The human looked around at the chaos with calm eyes. "What is the situation?" Jake asked. "We are outgunned and outnumbered," the Queen replied. "The enemy wants to capture this ship and take Korath as a prize." Jake studied the tactical display, trying to understand the battle. "What about your dragon? Can it help fight?" "Korath is controlled by the psychic collar. It can only do what I command it to do, but in space combat, dragons are limited. They are powerful, but they cannot match modern weapons." "What if you remove the collar?" The question sent shock waves through the bridge. Every officer turned to stare at Jake with disbelief. "Remove the collar?" Queen Zarethel looked at him as if he had suggested cutting off her own arms. "Without the collar, Korath would be free. It might turn against us. It might flee and leave us to die, or it might fight to protect the ship that has been its home for 30 years, Jake replied. "You said dragons are intelligent." "Korath knows this ship better than anyone. It knows the crew, even if they have kept it prisoner." Another impact shook the ship. The lights flickered and more damage reports came in. "Shields down to 30%, an officer called out. "My queen," General Thax's voice came over the communication system from the lower decks. "We are losing this battle. We need to consider evacuation." Queen Zarethel looked at the tactical display. The enemy ships were closing in, and her own vessel was taking heavy damage. In a few more minutes, the shields would fail completely. "Jake," she said quietly, "if I remove that collar and Korath chooses to abandon us, we will all die. If you keep the collar on and we lose this battle, Korath will become a slave to your enemies," Jake replied. "At least this way, the dragon gets to choose its own fate." The Queen thought about her conversation with the War Council. She had talked about earning respect instead of demanding obedience. She had wondered what her empire might become if it was built on something other than fear. Now she had a chance to find out. "Commander Vex, escort me to the dragon's chamber," she ordered. "My queen in the middle of a battle?" "Especially in the middle of a battle." They made their way through the ship as it continued to shake from enemy fire. Emergency lights cast red shadows on the walls, and the sound of damage control teams echoed through the corridors. In the dragon's chamber, Korath was agitated. The ancient creature could sense the danger to the ship, and its instincts were telling it to fight. But the collar held it in place. forcing it to remain passive while its home was under attack. Queen Zarathil approached the dragon with Jake beside her. Korath's massive eyes focused on them, and the queen could see frustration and anger in that ancient gaze. "Korath," she said softly, "I am going to remove your collar. You will be free to choose your own path. You can leave this ship and find a new life among the stars, or you can stay and help us fight." Jake placed his hand on the dragon's snout again. "Whatever you choose, we will respect your decision." The queen reached up and touched the control device on her belt. The psychic collar around Korath's neck had been her source of power for 30 years. With one command, she could remove it and give up that control. Forever, she pressed the button. The collar fell away from Korath's neck with a soft clang. For the first time in 3 decades, the star dragon was free. Korath raised its massive head and let out a roar that shook the entire chamber. It was not a roar of anger, but of joy and freedom. The dragon's scales began to glow with their natural starlight, something the collar had suppressed for years. The dragon looked down at Queen Zarathil and Jake. Then, to everyone's amazement, Korath lowered its head in a gesture of respect to both of them. "You freed me," the dragon's voice echoed. In their minds, for the first time, Korath was able to communicate without the collar's interference. "After 30 years, you chose to trust me. What will you do?" the queen asked. "I will protect my home," Korath replied. "This ship has been my prison, but it has also been my home. These people have been my captors, but they have also been my companions. I choose to fight." The dragon launched itself through the ship's launch bay and into space. Without the collar's limitations, Korath moved with a grace and power that amazed everyone watching. The creature was magnificent, its scales catching starlight as it flew between the enemy ships. The Scarith fleet had never faced a free star dragon before. Their weapons were designed to fight ships and soldiers, not an ancient creature that moved like living lightning. Korath tore through their formation, disabling ships with precision strikes that avoided killing the crews. From the bridge of the Crimson Talon, Queen Zarathil watched in awe. This was what Korath had always been capable of, but the collar had held it back. The dragon fought not with mindless fury, but with intelligence and strategy. "The enemy fleet is retreating," Commander Vex reported with amazement. "They cannot match Korath's speed and agility." The battle was over in minutes. The Scarith ships fled into hyperspace, unwilling to face a creature they could not understand or defeat. Korath returned to the ship, settling gently in the launch bay. Queen Zarathil and Jake went to meet the dragon. Korath's eyes were bright with satisfaction, but also with something else: gratitude. "Thank you," the dragon said to both of them. "For 30 years, I forgot what it felt like to choose my own actions. You gave me back my freedom, and I chose to use it to protect those I care about." The queen felt tears in her golden eyes. "I thought freedom meant losing control, but it actually means gaining something more valuable: trust." Jake smiled. "And that is what I tried to tell you. Sometimes the strongest bonds are the ones that people choose for themselves." Over the following days, word of what had happened spread throughout the ship and beyond. The crew members who had witnessed Korath's free choice to defend them began to look at their human guest with new respect. They also began to question their own assumptions about strength and leadership. Queen Zarathil offered Jake his freedom and safe passage back to human space. But she also offered him something else: a position as advisor to help her rebuild the Valeth Empire on new principles. "I want to learn more about this thing you humans call diplomacy," she said. "I want to understand how to build alliances instead of just conquering enemies." Jake accepted the offer. "It will not be easy. Your people have been thinking one way for centuries. Change takes time." "All worthwhile things take time," the queen replied. "But I think we have a good teacher." Korath, now free but choosing to stay, became a symbol of the new direction for the Valeth Empire. The dragon's choice to protect rather than flee showed other species that change was possible. Even for the most unlikely beings, the queen began reaching out to other races, not as a conqueror but as someone seeking to understand. Some rejected her overtures, suspicious of Valeth motives. But others, intrigued by the stories of a star dragon choosing freedom and still protecting its former captors, agreed to talk. Jake found himself at the center of these negotiations, helping both sides understand each other. His simple wisdom and practical approach to problems made him valuable in ways he had never imagined. One evening, as Jake stood in the dragon's chamber watching Korath rest peacefully, Queen Zarathil joined him. "Do you ever regret leaving your home to help us?" she asked. Jake thought about the mining colony where he had been captured. It seemed like a lifetime ago. "I miss my old life sometimes, but I think this is where I am supposed to be. Someone wants tea?" Jake Coleman wiped sweat from his forehead as he walked through the strange forest on planet Zarian 7. The trees here were not like the ones back on Earth. They were made of some kind of crystal that caught the light from the two suns above. The crystal trees made soft ringing sounds when the wind blew through them. Jake had been on this planet for 3 days now. He was a scientist who studied plants and animals on new worlds. His job was to take pictures and collect samples. He had to be careful not to hurt any living things while he worked. The forest was beautiful but also dangerous. Sharp crystal branches could cut through his protective suit if he was not careful. Some of the plants here could poison him if he touched them. Jake always followed the rules his bosses gave him. Rule number 1 was simple: look but do not touch. The local animals. Jake was taking pictures of a bright blue flower when he heard something strange. It was a crying sound, like a small animal in pain. The sound came from deeper in the forest. Jake stopped and listened carefully. The crying came again, weaker this time. Jake knew he should ignore the sound. His job was to study plants, not to help animals, but the crying sounded so sad and desperate. Jake could not just walk away. He picked up his equipment bag and followed. The sound, the crying, led him to a place where several large crystal trees had fallen down. The fallen trees created a maze of sharp branches and broken crystal pieces. Jake had to be very careful as he climbed over the debris. One wrong step could cut him badly. The crying got louder as Jake got closer. Finally, he saw where the sound was coming from. A small animal was trapped under a heavy crystal branch. The animal was about the size of a house cat, but it looked like a tiny lion. It had golden fur that seemed to glow in the sunlight. The most amazing thing was that it had 6 legs instead of 4. The little creature looked up at Jake with big, frightened eyes. The eyes glowed with a soft blue light. Jake had never seen anything like it. The animal tried to move but could not free itself. One of its back legs was caught under the heavy crystal branch. Jake set down his equipment and studied the situation. The crystal branch was too heavy for him to lift alone. But he could see that the little animal was hurt and scared. It had been trapped here for a long time. Its fur was dirty and it looked very thirsty. Jake knew he was breaking the rules by helping. But he could not leave the small creature to die. He took out his tools and started working on the crystal branch. The crystal was hard but not impossible to break. Jake used his hammer to chip away at the branch piece by piece. The little animal watched Jake work. At first it was afraid and tried to move away from him, but soon it seemed to understand that Jake was trying to help. It stopped struggling and lay still. After an hour of hard work, Jake managed to break the crystal branch into smaller pieces. He carefully moved the pieces away from the trapped animal. The little creature was finally free, but it could not stand up. Its back leg was hurt badly. Jake took out his medical kit. He had supplies for treating human injuries, but he hoped they would work on the alien animal too. Very gently, he examined the creature's injured leg. The bone was not broken, but the leg was badly bruised and swollen. The little animal did not try to bite or scratch Jake. It seemed to know that he was trying to help. Jake cleaned the wound with antiseptic and wrapped the leg with a bandage. The creature made soft purring sounds, like a cat when it is happy. Jake realized that the animal was very thirsty. He poured some water from his bottle into his hand and offered it to the creature. The little animal drank eagerly. Jake gave it more water and some food from his emergency supplies. The creature ate hungrily, as if it had not eaten in days. As the sun began to set, Jake knew he had to make a decision. He could not leave the injured animal here alone. It would die without help. Taking it with him would be against all the rules. Jake looked at the little creature who was now curled up next to his leg, purring softly. Jake made his choice. He built a small shelter using pieces of crystal and his emergency blanket. He made sure the shelter was warm and dry. The little animal seemed to understand that Jake was taking care of it. It followed Jake around as he worked, walking carefully on its 3 good legs. That night, Jake slept in the shelter with the alien creature. He woke up several times to check on it. Each time, the little animal was sleeping peacefully next to him. Jake started to think of the creature as Spark because of the way its eyes glowed in the dark. The next morning, Jake gave Spark more water and food. The creature's leg looked better already. The swelling was going down and Spark could put a little weight on it. Jake was amazed at how quickly the alien animal was healing. Jake spent the day taking care of Spark and doing his regular work. He took pictures of plants and collected samples, but he found himself watching Spark more than he watched the plants. The little creature was very smart. It learned to stay close to Jake and to avoid the dangerous crystal branches. By evening, Jake realized he had a big problem. His mission on Zarian 7 was supposed to last 2 weeks. He had only been here for 4 days. What would he do with Spark for the next 10 days? And what would happen when it was time for him to leave the planet? Jake looked at Spark, who was playing with a small piece of crystal. The little creature seemed happy and healthy now, but Jake knew that Spark belonged with its own kind. Somewhere on this planet, there were probably other creatures like Spark. Maybe they were looking for their lost family member. That night, as Jake fell asleep with Spark curled up beside him, he wondered what he had gotten himself into. He had broken the rules to save one small life, but he had no idea that this simple act of kindness would change everything. Jake woke up on his 5th day on Zarian 7 to find Spark sitting by the entrance of their shelter. The little creature was looking out at the crystal forest with its glowing blue eyes. Jake could tell that Spark was thinking about something important. Over the past few days, Jake had learned a lot about his new friend. Spark was much smarter than Jake had first thought. The creature could understand when Jake pointed at things. It knew the difference between Jake's happy voice and his worried voice. When Jake said no in a firm tone, Spark would stop what it was doing. The most amazing thing was that Spark seemed to be trying to talk to Jake. The creature made different sounds for different things. It had one sound for water, another for food, and a special purring sound when it was happy. Jake started to make the same sounds back to Spark. Soon they had their own simple language. Jake's leg was healing well. The little creature could walk on all 6 legs now, though it still limped a little. Jake was happy to see Spark getting stronger, but he was also worried. The stronger Spark got, the more it seemed to miss its family. On the 7th day, something interesting happened. Jake was collecting samples near a stream when Spark suddenly became very excited. The creature started making loud calling sounds that Jake had never heard before. Spark ran to the top of a small hill and kept calling. Jake climbed up the hill to see what was happening. From the top, they could see far across the crystal forest. Jake used his binoculars to look around. He could not see anything unusual, but Spark kept calling and looking in the same direction. After a while, Jake thought he heard something. It was very faint, but it sounded like other creatures calling back to Spark. The sounds were coming from far away, maybe many miles. Spark heard them too and got even more excited. Jake realized what was happening. Spark's family was out there somewhere, looking for their lost member. They were calling to each other across the forest. Jake felt happy that Spark's family was still alive, but he also felt sad. Soon he would have to say goodbye to his friend. That night, Jake could not sleep well. He kept thinking about what he should do. He knew that Spark belonged with its own kind, but he also knew that taking Spark back to its family would be very dangerous. The adult creatures might see Jake as a threat. They might attack him to protect their young. The next morning, Jake made a decision. He would try to find Spark's family. It was the right thing to do, even if it was dangerous. Jake started packing his equipment. He would take only what he needed for the journey. Spark seemed to understand what Jake was planning. The creature became very excited and started making happy sounds. It ran around the shelter, gathering small objects that it wanted to take along. Jake laughed at how much Spark acted like a child getting ready for a trip. Before they left, Jake sent a message to his partner Lisa Wong. She was supposed to come to Zarian 7 in a few days with new supplies. Jake told her about Spark and what he was planning to do. He asked her to wait for him at the landing site. Jake was nervous about telling Lisa what he had done. He had broken many rules by helping Spark. Lisa might be angry with him. She might even report him to their bosses. But Jake knew he had to tell someone where he was going, in case something happened to him. The journey to find Spark's family began on the 10th day. Jake had studied his maps and figured out the direction the calls were coming from. It would take at least 2 days to walk there, maybe more. The path led through some of the most dangerous parts of the Crystal Forest. Jake carried a backpack with food, water, and medical supplies. Spark walked beside him, sometimes running ahead to scout the path. The little creature was a good guide. It seemed to know which crystal formations were safe to climb and which ones were too sharp or unstable. On the first day of their journey, Jake learned even more about how smart Spark was. When they stopped to rest, Spark would bring Jake plants to eat. The creature had learned which plants were safe for humans and which ones were poisonous. Spark was taking care of Jake just like Jake had taken care of Spark. That evening they made camp in a small clearing. Jake built a fire and shared his food with Spark. The creature sat close to Jake and made soft purring sounds. Jake could tell that Spark was happy but also nervous about seeing its family again. During the night, Jake heard the calling sounds again. They were much closer now. Spark heard them too and answered with its own calls. The sounds went back and forth for a long time. Jake could not understand what they were saying, but it sounded like a conversation. The next morning, Spark was very excited. The creature kept running ahead and then coming back to Jake, as if it wanted him to walk faster. Jake could tell they were getting close to Spark's family. Around noon, they reached the top of a high ridge. Jake looked down into the valley below and saw something that took his breath away. There were dozens of creatures like Spark moving through the crystal forest. But these were not small like Spark. These were full-grown adults, and they were huge. The adult creatures were as big as lions on Earth, maybe bigger. They had the same glowing eyes and crystal-like fur as Spark, but they looked much more powerful and dangerous. Jake counted at least 20 of them, including several young ones like Spark. Jake watched the family group through his binoculars. They were clearly looking for something. The adults would call out and then listen for an answer. The young ones stayed close to their parents. Jake realized that this whole family had been searching for Spark for over a week. Spark saw its family and became very excited. The creature started calling loudly and running back and forth. Jake knew there was no turning back now. In a few hours, he would have to face these powerful alien creatures and hope they would understand that he was trying to help. Jake spent the rest of the day watching the family and planning his approach. He wanted to return Spark safely, but he also wanted to survive the encounter. He had no idea how the adult creatures would react to seeing a human with their young one. As the sun began to set, Jake made his final preparations. Tomorrow, he would find out if his act of kindness would be rewarded or if it would cost him his life. But looking at Spark, who was so excited to see its family again, Jake knew he was doing the right thing. The little creature that had started as a stranger in need had become his friend. Now it was time to take Spark home, no matter what the cost might be. Jake woke up before dawn on what he knew would be the most important day of his life. Spark was already awake, sitting at the edge of their small camp and looking down toward the valley where its family was waiting. The little creature had barely slept all night. Jake packed his equipment slowly, checking everything twice. He made sure his emergency beacon was working in case something went wrong. He also recorded a message for Lisa explaining what he was about to do. If the adult creatures killed him, at least someone would know what had happened. The walk down into the valley took 2 hours. Jake had to be very careful on the steep crystal slopes. One wrong step could send him tumbling down the rocky hillside. Spark moved much more easily, using its 6 legs to grip the crystal surfaces that Jake found slippery dots as they got closer to the family group. Jake could hear the adult creatures calling to each other. Their voices were much deeper and more powerful than Spark's small sounds. The calls echoed through the valley like thunder. Jake felt very small and afraid. Spark became more and more excited as they approached. The little creature would run ahead and then come back to Jake as if it wanted to make sure he was still following. Jake could tell that Spark wanted to run to its family, but the creature stayed with him. Finally, they reached the edge of the area where the family was searching. Jake could see several of the adult creatures through the crystal trees. They were enormous, much bigger than he had thought when watching from the ridge. Their fur sparkled in the sunlight, and their eyes glowed like blue stars. Jake stopped behind a large crystal formation and tried to calm his nerves. His heart was beating so fast that he could hear it in his ears. He knew that once he stepped out into the open, there would be no going back. Jake looked down at Spark, who was trembling with excitement. The little creature looked up at Jake with its glowing eyes. In that moment, Jake felt a strong connection with his small friend. They had been through so much together. Now it was time to say goodbye. Jake took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the crystal formation. He was still about 50 yards away from the nearest adult creature, but he was now in the open where they could see him. He gently set Spark down on the ground. The reaction was immediate. The adult creature closest to Jake saw him and let out a loud roar that shook the crystal trees. Within seconds, all the other adults were running toward Jake's location. Jake had never been so scared in his life. Spark ran toward its family, calling out in its small voice. The little creature was clearly happy to see the adults, but it kept looking back at Jake. Several adult creatures surrounded Spark, checking to make sure it was not hurt. Jake stood perfectly still with his hands raised above his head. He had read that this was a peaceful gesture that many species understood. The adult creatures formed a large circle around him, but they did not attack. They seemed to be studying him, trying to understand what he was and why he was there. One of the largest adults, with silver streaks in its golden fur, stepped forward. This creature was clearly the leader of the family. It was bigger than the others, and when it made sounds, the other adults listened carefully. Jake guessed this was probably Spark's parent. The leader approached Jake slowly, sniffing the air around him. Jake tried not to move, even though every instinct told him to run. The creature was close enough now that Jake could see his reflection in its glowing eyes. The leader's teeth were huge and sharp. Spark ran to the leader and started making excited sounds. The little creature kept running back and forth between Jake and the leader, as if it was trying to tell a story. Jake realized that Spark was trying to explain what had happened. The leader listened to Spark's sounds carefully. Then it looked at Jake with what seemed like curiosity rather than anger. The creature tilted its head to one side the way a dog might when it was trying to understand something, slowly. More adult creatures came closer to Jake. They sniffed him and made soft sounds to each other. Jake realized they were talking about him. These creatures had their own language, and they were trying to decide what to do with him. Jake noticed that several of the adults had scars on their bodies. Some were missing pieces of their ears or had marks on their fur. These were not just pretty animals. They were survivors who had fought to protect their family. Jake felt even more respect for them. The young creatures, including Spark, seemed less afraid of Jake than the adults. They came closer and made curious sounds. One of them, slightly bigger than Spark, even touched Jake's boot with its paw. An adult immediately called the young one back. As the hours passed, Jake began to understand that he was not going to be killed immediately. The creatures were having some kind of discussion about him. Different adults would come forward and make sounds as if they were giving their opinions. It was like a meeting or a trial. Jake stayed in the same position for so long that his arms began to ache from holding them up, but he did not dare move. He could tell that the creatures were still deciding whether he was a friend or an enemy. The sun was high in the sky when something changed. The leader made a series of loud calls, and all the other adults became quiet. Then the leader approached Jake again, this time coming very close. Jake could feel the creature's breath on his face. The Leader studied Jake's face for a long moment. Then it did something that surprised Jake. The creature gently touched Jake's forehead with its own forehead, the way cats sometimes do to show affection. The touch was brief, but Jake felt that it meant something important. After the leader stepped back, the other adults began to relax. They were still watching Jake carefully, but they no longer seemed ready to attack. Jake realized that he had passed some kind of test. Spark ran to Jake and rubbed against his legs, purring loudly. The little creature was clearly happy that its family had accepted Jake. Some of the other young creatures came closer too, their curiosity overcoming their fear. Jake slowly lowered his hands. None of the adults reacted with alarm. He knelt down and gently petted Spark one last time. The little creature looked up at him with its glowing eyes, and Jake felt like they were saying goodbye. Then Spark ran back to its family, where it belonged. The adult creatures began to move away, heading deeper into the crystal forest. But the leader stayed behind for a moment, looking at Jake with what seemed like respect. Jake understood that this was his signal to leave. He backed away slowly, never taking his eyes off the remaining creatures. When he was far enough away, he turned and began walking back toward the ridge. As Jake climbed up the crystal slope, he could hear the family calling to each other as they moved through the forest. Spark's small voice was mixed in with the deeper calls of the adults. Jake smiled, knowing that his friend was safe and happy with its family. The journey back to his camp took the rest of the day. Jake was exhausted, but he felt good about what he had done. He had returned Spark to its family, and somehow he had survived the encounter. He had learned that these alien creatures were not just animals, but intelligent beings with their own society and customs. That night, Jake slept better than he had in weeks. He had faced his fears and done the right thing. Tomorrow, he would have to explain everything to Lisa and face the consequences of breaking the rules. But tonight he was just happy that Spark was home where it belonged. Jake thought his adventure was over when he left Spark with its family. He was wrong. The next morning, he woke up to find that he was not alone in his camp. The leader of Spark's family was sitting quietly near his shelter, watching him sleep. Jake's heart started racing. He had no idea why the large creature had followed him. Maybe it had changed its mind about letting him go. Maybe it wanted to make sure Jake left the area. Jake stayed very still and tried to think of what to do. The leader made a soft sound. Not threatening, but not friendly either. It was a sound Jake had not heard before. Then the creature stood up and walked a few steps away from Jake's camp. It looked back at Jake and made the same sound again. Jake realized that the creature wanted him to follow. This was not what he had expected. He had thought his encounter with Spark's family was finished. Slowly, Jake got out of his sleeping bag and started packing his equipment. The leader waited patiently while Jake got ready. When Jake was finished packing, the creature started walking back toward the valley. Jake followed, wondering what was going to happen next. The walk back to the valley took an hour. Jake could see other members of Spark's family waiting there, but this time there were many more creatures than before. Jake counted at least 30. Adults plus many young ones. It looked like several families had come together. As Jake and the leader approached the gathering, all the creatures turned to look at Jake. Their glowing eyes seemed to study every detail of his appearance. Jake felt like he was walking into a courtroom where he was about to be judged. The creatures had arranged themselves in a very specific pattern. The oldest and largest adults were in the center, forming a circle. Around them were the younger adults, and the young ones like Spark were on the outside. Jake realized that this was not a random gathering. These creatures had organized themselves for a ceremony. The leader guided Jake to the center of the circle, where the oldest creatures were waiting. Jake had never seen such ancient-looking members of this species. Their fur was streaked with silver and white, and their eyes held a wisdom that spoke of many years of experience. Jake stood in the center of the circle, feeling very small and vulnerable. The creatures began to make sounds to each other, but these sounds were different from the calling he had heard before. These sounds were more complex, like a language with many different words and meanings. One of the oldest creatures, an ancient female with almost completely silver fur, stepped forward. She walked around Jake in a slow circle, studying him from every angle. Her eyes seemed to look right through him, as if she could see into his thoughts and feelings. After the old female finished her examination, she returned to her place in the circle. Then she began to make a series of complex sounds. Jake realized that she was speaking to the other creatures about him. The sounds went on for a long time, and Jake could tell that this was a very important speech. When the old female finished speaking, other creatures began to respond. Each adult seemed to have a chance to give their opinion. Some of the sounds were gentle and calm. Others were harsher and more aggressive. Jake understood that they were debating what to do with him. During this debate, something amazing happened. Jake noticed that the creature's fur began to change color slightly. The patterns of light and dark in their fur shifted as they spoke. Jake realized that these creatures could communicate with color as well as sound. They had a much more complex language than he had imagined. The debate continued for hours. Jake's legs began to ache from standing in one position for so long, but he did not dare move. He could tell that this was a very serious process, and he did not want to interrupt it. During the debate, Spark came forward several times. The little creature would run to Jake and make sounds, then return to its family. Jake could tell that Spark was trying to defend him, telling the adults about how Jake had helped and cared for it. Other young creatures began to speak up too. They seemed to be supporting Spark's story. Jake realized that these young ones were not afraid of him because they could see that Spark trusted him. Their opinions seemed to carry some weight in the debate. As the sun moved across the sky, Jake began to notice patterns in the creature's behavior. When they agreed with a speaker, their fur would show bright colors. When they disagreed, the colors would become darker. It was like watching a visual vote taking place. The most interesting part was when the creatures began to share scents. They would approach each other and touch noses, sharing complex chemical messages. Jake realized that these creatures could communicate through smell as well as sight and sound. They had at least 3 different ways of sharing information. Jake started to understand that he was witnessing something very special. This was not just a group of animals deciding what to do with a human. This was an advanced civilization holding a formal trial. These creatures had laws, customs, and procedures that they followed when making important decisions. The debate reached a turning point when the leader who had brought Jake to the gathering stepped forward. This creature spoke for a long time, using all 3 forms of communication. Its fur showed complex patterns of color, and it shared scents with many of the other adults. Jake could tell that the leader was telling the complete story of what had happened. The creature described how Jake had saved Spark, cared for it, and then brought it safely home. The leader's fur showed bright, positive colors as it spoke. When the leader finished speaking, the ancient female who had examined Jake stepped forward. Again, she made a series of sounds that were different from anything Jake had heard before. These sounds were formal and ceremonial, like the words of a judge announcing a verdict. All the creatures became perfectly still as the old female spoke. Even the young ones stopped moving and listened carefully. Jake could feel the tension in the air. This was the moment when his fate would be decided. The old female finished speaking and looked directly at Jake. Her ancient eyes seemed to see right into his soul. Then she did something that Jake would never forget. She bowed her head to him, showing respect. One by one, all the other creatures in the circle bowed their heads too. Jake realized that this was not a gesture of submission, but of recognition. These creatures were acknowledging him as an equal, someone worthy of their respect. The ceremony was not over yet. The old female approached Jake and gently touched his forehead with her own, just as the leader had done the day before. But this time, the touch lasted longer, and Jake felt a strange sensation, as if the creature was trying to share something with him. When the old female stepped back, Jake saw that her fur was glowing more brightly than before. The glow spread to the other creatures until the entire gathering was shining with soft light. Jake realized that he was witnessing something sacred, a ritual that few outsiders had ever seen. The judgment was complete. Jake had been found worthy by an alien civilization, but he had no idea what this meant for his future or what these remarkable creatures expected from him next.